Welcome and good afternoon. I'm Amy Blaymore Patterson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Land Conservation Council. Welcome to Session 4 of the 2022 Connecticut Land Conservation Conference. We have also been starting each meeting with a land acknowledgement. We in Connecticut are on the traditional territory of the Mohegan, the Paugussett, the Wappinger, the Pequot, and many other Indigenous peoples. We take this time to acknowledge the original caretakers of the land and encourage you to spend some time getting to know their cultures and the history of the lands on which you live, hike, and enjoy. Lastly, as we approach the end of yet another Connecticut Land Conservation Conference, I want to underscore our appreciation for the generosity of our 2022 sponsors who have again stepped up big time to support us. Our lead sponsors, Eversource Energy, the Nature Conservancy, the Trust for Public Land, Audubon Connecticut, Aquarian Water Company, Connecticut River Gateway Commission, Donosky and Associates, Karen and Fazio, the Land Trust Alliance, the Lawrence J. London Foundation, Little Green Light, the South Central Regional Water Authority are joined by at least 45 other organizations, including many land trusts. We thank you so much for your continuing support as we have adapted this important annual event through alternative formats over the past 2 years. Today's roundtable discussion is entitled Conservation Education, Empowering Students to Help Our Planet. It is one of 5 roundtables organized by a committee of emerging conservation and environmental leaders who took the reins in planning and implementing the conference this year. In all 3 of the sessions thus far, without exception, all of our speakers, no matter what generation they represent, related their love for nature and their passionate desire to protect the environment to experiences that they had in their youth. In some cases, those experiences came through organized, more formal opportunities like camp, scouting, or school programs. In others, it came from unstructured play, having the freedom to explore, climbing trees, tending a backyard garden, going fishing or boating with no agenda other than having a chance to connect with nature and the environment. While land trusts across the state offer an impressive array of opportunities, both structured through their programming and unstructured through their trails, preserves, and parks for people of all ages to connect with land and each other, they are not reaching everyone. And on the flip side, land trusts are continually looking for ways to get young people and their parents more involved with their organizations. Recognizing these opportunities and the needs to connect with youth, today's roundtable was spurred by a suggestion from CLCC board member Doris Johnson that our organization connect with the Connecticut Outdoor Environmental Education Association to brainstorm about how land trusts can do even more to connect people of all ages, but especially children, with nature and green spaces. So building off of that suggestion and working with our young planning committee, we assembled an esteemed group of environmental educators to share their experiences, insights, and tips to create dynamic experiential programs that inspire and connect students with the natural world and thereby help to build the next generation of conservation leaders. I'm honored to turn the conversation over to our facilitator, Dennis Liu. Dennis is Vice President for Education of the E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation and the Half Earth Project, which he will describe through his introduction. I encourage you to get to know Dennis and our speakers today and their myriad accomplishments as environmental educators by reading their bios on our website, going to their web pages, researching their organizations, and following through with them. Please join me in welcoming Dennis Liu and today's speakers. And thank you again so much for coming.
Well, thank you, Amy. I want to thank you and Christina, particularly for all the organizational work that you've put into this, what just seems like a fantastic event. And of course, I want to thank all the panelists that you're going to get to hear from today, and you'll get to meet them in a few minutes. And then I assume it's very likely that it's a beautiful spring day wherever you are, and it's lunchtime. And so I really want to thank you for taking your time in this season of reawakening to listen to some talking heads. But I think we're gonna do some really good talking, and hopefully you'll get a chance to get outside later in the day. Well, to help frame things and frame this discussion and frame the way we think about young people their relationship with nature, their relationship with natural spaces. I just wanted to give a little bit of background on our organization. I'm going to just show a few slides. So get those up and going, and get the slideshow running. Make sure that everyone can see that. All right, everyone sees the slides. Well, you know, in particular, if you're of a certain generation, it's likely that you know this person or have heard of this person. This is E.O. Wilson. He's my longtime friend and mentor. Ed died the day after Christmas last year at the age of 92. It was obviously sad for us, but Ed had a really good life, and through his many books, had a big influence on thinking about how we protect the natural world, a particular emphasis on species. And, you know, he wrote a book called Half Earth, which is the main project of the foundation. And it's a call to save half of the planet for all of nature. And of course, that includes humans. We're part of nature. So our focus of the foundation is particularly on species. So of course, the places where those species live, the habitats they're dependent on, is extremely important. And one of the main parts of our project has been to develop a digital map. As most of you appreciate, life on the planet is not evenly distributed. And that's part of the beauty of our planet. If you go to visit one part of Connecticut alone, you'll see very different things than if you go to another part of Connecticut. One of the other important things, if you're working in the arena of conservation, is to think about human pressures, the way the relentlessly growing and consuming human population, how does it use the landscape, and how can we find ways to have our use of the landscape not interfere with all the other species on the planet. And then another layer on this map is existing protection, and the map reveals that protected areas, just to focus on the United States, are not necessarily in the places we need to protect the most species or protect the rarest species. Now, what I'm showing you on this map right now is a priority layer. So what's bright on the map are places that we should consider focusing some of our conservation efforts. Now you'll notice Connecticut is not lit up bright on this map, but you can, if you go to visit the Half Earth map, easy to find, you can focus in not only on Connecticut, but on a particular trust land that you may be interested in. And you can learn about the species that that place has particular stewardship over. So we hope this map is an engagement tool and a way for people to look at their local natural areas, but also see the global perspective for these things. Now, I wanted to use, you know, Ed wrote over 30 books. As I mentioned, he's inspired so many people. All kinds of people have been inspired by Ed's writings. He was a Harvard professor for 50 years, but he grew up in Alabama. And yet he found a way to reach so many different people. And one of those people is Lorette Savoy. And I wanted to use her quote from one of Ed's books, The Diversity of Life, which she uses to motivate her own book called Trace, where she uses her family history, Black American, Native American history, to look at the US landscape and ask questions about the way we use land. But she pulls this quote from Ed's book, Diversity of Life, to make the point that we are part of nature. And that many of the environmental issues that we face today boil down to not having that perspective, from misunderstanding that we're one species among many, and that together all these species protect each other and make the planet stronger. And so today's theme of focusing on young people, if the human population is going to find a way to develop an enduring ethic, as Aldo Leopold, of course, pointed out, a land ethic, and find a sense of preferred direction, what better time to do that than when people are young? So that's going to be the theme of today's discussion. And I just wanted to mention quickly that I have an Educator ambassador group, and I would encourage anyone who's interested to join. You don't necessarily have to be a professional educator to join this network. We do mostly work with teachers, middle school, high school, college level, but also with non-formal educators. And you're going to hear today about some programs, particularly informed by land trusts, but programs for different ways to engage young people in exploring the natural world and understanding our role in the natural world better. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to turn to introduce the panelists. I'd like to start off with Sue. We're just going to quickly go through some quick introductions so that you get some sense of who you get to hear from today. And so Sue, just give me a quick introduction to yourself.
Well, thank you for inviting me today. It's very exciting actually to be here in this type of a gathering. My name is Sue Quincy, and I work for the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection in the State Parks Division, and I'm stationed at the Kellogg Environmental Center in Derby, where I perform the duties of an environmental outreach specialist. So my primary function is providing resources, materials, and professional development to a variety of formal and informal educators, as well as students, on the integration of environmental topics into curriculum and into everyday life.
That's terrific. How about Amanda? How are you doing, Amanda? Quick introduction.
Hi, I'm Amanda Thompson. I'm the president of the East Granby Land Trust. I've also been running our programs for about 12 years now. Probably our most notable program is our intern program with high school students, and I look forward to talking about that a little bit later.
That's terrific. And then Laura, how about you?
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here with all of you. My name is Laura Crisneros. I work at the University of Connecticut in the Natural Resources Department. I'm an assistant extension professor, and I direct our Natural Resources Conservation Academy programs, which work with high school students and adult community partners and support them on local conservation efforts. And we've worked with a number of land trusts. And then the last thing I'll share is that I'm also on the board of the Connecticut Outdoor and Environmental Education Association. So happy to share and talk about that as well as the resource for everyone.
Terrific. And then Brian, our final panelist.
I am Brian Avery, currently a Public Allies AmeriCorps service member serving with the Connecticut Forest and Park Association. And I'm kind of a journeyman educator. I've been around to a lot of different nonprofits, and I'm happy to be here and share some of my experience and insights with you guys.
That's terrific. Well, so the way, we sort of have three main discussion areas that we had talked about covering. Now, we want to encourage everyone to use the chat to enter some questions. And in fact, what I'd like to do now is ask the audience if you could go ahead and maybe just type simply in the chat sort of what your role is, why you've tuned into this today. It could be that you're a land trust staff. It could be that you're a board member. It could be that you're a interested citizen. It would just be good to see what sort of folks we have in the audience with us today. And so I'm gonna ask questions. I'm gonna probably point a given question to a panelist, but hopefully other panelists will then have some comments, and we'll try to have this in the spirit of a discussion. So I'm going to start off with Brian. Now, Brian, you mentioned that you're sort of a journeyman. So you've had a lot of experiences, it sounds like, but you're really forming your career. I'd like to ask you, why, there's a basic question. Why do you think it's important for young people to have a relationship with nature, and maybe mention an experience that was important to you, and especially in pursuing the career that you are now?
Yeah, definitely. There is a current pressing need, especially for kids right now. But even before COVID, the need for calm and insightful reflection and being unstimulated or less stimulated has always been there. And so one of my fondest memories is back in Boy Scouts when I was doing my environmental science merit badge. Part of the requirement was sitting in the same place and journaling what was going on with nature in that spot. And the little world that opens up to you when you're quiet and mindful in that space is really powerful for kids, especially in a time where stimulation is easy to get. And especially now, we have kids that have felt kind of stuck. They've been stuck at home. They've been stuck not learning as much as they could. And so one of the biggest benefits right now to being in outdoor spaces is that it's really hard to feel stuck when you're moving down a trail. When you're taking a walk, when you're absorbing the wildlife around you, it's really hard to stay stuck in your own stuck place. And so the mental health benefit right now is, I think, one of the biggest pressing issues for kids.
Yeah, well, that's a terrific way to start this off, Brian. I didn't mention in my intro, if you look at our map, the state of Connecticut has about 7% of the land is under formal protection. And just the land trusts, the acreage, that's part of this organization is about 7%. So the privately held lands in Connecticut are extremely important for people to find these kind of spaces. Anyone else want to say something about either, their own experience with nature, why they think it's particularly important for young people? Yeah, Laura, please.
Yeah, another thing that I continually hear students expressing is an increased anxiety. Maybe it's an anxiety with the pandemic or climate anxiety. And so empowering students with ways of how to contribute to community-based solutions is so critical to, they don't even need to go into an environmental career later on, but just to show them that they have that efficacy or that agency to contribute to these efforts, regardless of what they do in their career, is really important.
Sue or Amanda, would you like to add anything? Yeah, Sue, please.
What has been said is very important and definitely, I think, resounds with everybody. Also, there's a need to try and reconnect with community, especially after this pandemic, that there's a growing instance of people being more focused on individual and what they have right here and now, instead of looking at the larger sense of things. And I think that by encouraging people, young people, as well as all ages, to become part of organizations at different levels and opening up the opportunities so that people in different types of settings can still feel part of community and start to build together. I think that's one of the main things that is very important to try and restructure, but also at this time. And that's kind of one of the focus that we're trying to do when we're offering programs and offering opportunities is connections and showing that everyone has a connection to the environment, whether they're living in an urban section or a rural section, that their environment is important and that they can connect to that environment wherever they are.
So I really love that. And that, really resonates with a little bit what I was trying to say in the introduction. It's people and nature. We're part of nature, but I really like your emphasis on it. These natural spaces and thinking about nature are actually an opportunity to form community. That's terrific. Well, Amanda, I was going to turn, if you want to make a comment on this theme, please do. I was going to turn to you and ask you a question. I was going to, you run a land trust, and I know you've put a lot of effort into your educational programming. So it's related to this question. Why is that so important that you've invested the time and the effort to do that? And maybe wondering a little bit about how you see that fitting with the broader role of a land trust, which, can have other functions. It doesn't exist just to educate or have experiences for people. Maybe you could say a word about that.
Sure. So we have an internship program. We take kids on in their March of their sophomore year all the way through their senior year. And the reason we ask for a long commitment is because, as anybody knows, when you work a job, it takes you a good year to 18 months to really know your job, right? And the same thing with the intern. So to feel like they can really play a role, like a knowledgeable role, I think it needs to be a longer term commitment. And we try, kind of like what Laura and Sue were saying about, you want everybody to connect with nature, and it doesn't just have to be the kids who are interested in science. It can be kids who want to go into business, and maybe they help out as our treasurer, or somebody else who wants to go into engineering and they help with trail building, or designing bridges, or something else. But the important thing is that everybody knows it takes more than one skill, or you can have many skills and contribute to a land trust and to a board. So so we like to get people with a variety of backgrounds as our interns. And although it's like everybody should do it for the good of the community, I think anybody kind of looks for what's in it for me, right? So we do set a couple of things right from the get-go with the kids. We let them know if they need recommendations for a National Honor Society, or for college, or for jobs, that we will write recommendation letters for them, and just the benefit of having being a board member with the land trust, how that looks on their college application. I think now so many students, they're told over and over again about, take AP Bio, it'll look great on your college application. Well, guess what? Everybody takes AP Bio now. So what can you do to look a little bit different than the person who's next to you? So I think they need to visualize how it benefits them, besides the fact that it does something good for your town. So we really try to break that down. And then the other piece of it is just, oftentimes they're in school and they talk about like big problems like global warming or something like that. And like, how can we help with that? Well, that's such a big issue to tackle. So we really break it down to, if you're an intern, you are going to come to a board meeting once a month. You're going to help co-steward a property. That means you're going to tour all our properties. You're going to pick one, and once a year, you're going to write a report on how we're going to manage that property. And also we talk about, they do an Earth Day event for our 6th grade. So you're going to help lead an event for the 6th grade once a year. Anything beyond that is whatever you want to contribute, or whatever you think would benefit you in the direction you're going in the future. So I think when you break it down into pieces for them, then they can say like, okay, I could do a meeting once a month. Yes, I could write a report once a year. Like, these are all things that are doable. and actionable. And that helps them kind of see what they're getting themselves into and then feel accomplished at the end because they can do all of that. You don't have to do everything, and it isn't 40 hours a year or anything like that. It's everybody doing their little part. But sometimes when it's too big of an issue or problem, it's hard to visualize that. So I think breaking it down for them really helps as well. I'm probably missing something, but I'm assuming, Dennis, you're going to ask me if I am.
No, I mean, another great point. I love the way these points are coming out here in our conversation, because it's true. I mean, I hear all the time, and I can see it in young people's eyes. Climate change is including the politicization that's come out of this, that thorny problem, is just weighing people down. And I like to say, thinking about biodiversity, and even if your lens is not as specifically just biodiversity, maybe it's clean water in a certain place. But again, land trusts and these open spaces offer an immediate and optimistic view of the ability of people to do something. So I love the way that you're, involving students in that. Let me just follow up quickly. You mentioned that, students are on the board. There's great benefits to them, sort of implied benefits to the community. So let me ask you selfishly, from the land trust point of view, what are you getting out of this? If you did not have these programs, what would you be missing? What would the loss be?
Well, I think the main thing we would be losing is perspective that's not represented on our board. So, they have access to a whole different set of information when it comes to our community. So what activities are going on, how we can incorporate ourselves in the community, because they know, when the different events are happening in town related to young people, and then how young people would respond to something. So if they're like, no, that'll never work, then it's just better to hear it up front rather than me put a lot of effort into a program and not have it run. The other thing is, I always think that younger kids respond better to older kids than they do to me talking.
Right.
So I think I can't replace that. So when we have our sixth grade outdoor education day, I walk around and I take pictures and they run all of the activities. So that way they have, a sophomore, junior, or senior who's telling them about, the oxygen cycle or the water cycle, or about native plants or water conservation, whatever it happens to be. And they remember that so much better if it comes from somebody who they look up to or want to be like.
Right.
So I think
more legit.
Those are the main things that we get from it, is just, and the hope is that someday then they want to join land trust boards, whether it's in East Granby or somewhere else. Hopefully they had a really pleasant experience, and they want to do that again because they see the value in it and they know what they have to contribute.
Yeah, let me if someone else has a comment, based on something Amanda said, I'd welcome it. I was going to turn to Laura next here. So if I'm not hearing any further comments, we can always come back to these things. So, Laura, you lead environmental education programs. I get the sense that are largely place-based. There's an emphasis on that. So I'd like to hear a little bit about your programs. I'm wondering about the connection between classroom learning and experiential learning, and maybe a little bit about how they support each other. I mean, in my own mind, I feel like we really should strive for a blend of these things, and it's not one or the other, and ways for them to support each other. So yeah, tell us a little bit about some of your programs.
Yeah, well, I think it's a nice segue from what Amanda was talking about, because a lot of the elements that she was talking about, this near peer mentoring, I'm all about that too. I think it's so critical providing that pathway programming so that students, if they want to continue their involvement, they know those pathways. I guess just to tell you a little bit about what I do. Our programming, I direct our Natural Resources Conservation Academy programs, and we have a variety of programs, but the core of them is we provide a field experience where we work with environmental professionals here at UConn or external to UConn to teach participants who are teens as well as adult community volunteers a variety of tools or techniques that they can use to study the environment, as well as user-friendly apps that we can access from our smartphone devices to, collect data or even use it to collect geospatial or mapping data. And a number of our adult community volunteers have been, they come from a wide variety of backgrounds. They're from community-based organizations like land trusts, they're with municipalities, and we've had many teachers, which is sort of that opportunity to bridge this non-formal environmental education world where I mainly sit and the formal side of education. And sometimes those teachers will partner with their students in these programs and bring what they're doing back into their classroom. And so after this field experience, they then return back home. They're paired, a high school student is paired with an adult community partner. Again, we've worked with so many amazing land trusts across the state. Would love to work with so many more. So if you're interested, please reach out to me. We work one-on-one with our teams so that they develop an environmental action project that is designed to whatever they're interested in, wherever the community need is, wherever there might be the land trust need, and also to align it with interests and skill sets of our teammates. So I also want to second what Amanda was saying about we need to have this asset-based mindset that everyone comes to the table with this rich perspective, rich skill sets. They don't need to be strictly science-based, what we say you need to have as a scientist. No, we need it all. And there's different ways to integrate, different talents into these projects. So we try and do that.
That's just another great point. I just want to quickly say that, I've been a STEM educator for most of my career, but one of the things about these topics is they're just so great for interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, but also just different temperaments of people can weigh in on these things. Sue, you wanted to make a comment.
It's something that both Laura and Amanda have been speaking about and is very illustrative of what needs to be happening in trying to do more of this, trying to give access to real life applications and allowing young people to have a valuable role. I love the phrase, it was a knowledgeable role that Amanda had used. And that is the environmental literacy aspect. And Connecticut does have an environmental literacy plan that is available on the COEEA website as we partner with COEEA so that can be accessed by all. But the key component for environmental literacy reflects and basically spouts that all citizens need to be literate about environment. And that's their environment where they are at that time. And so the more aspects of providing partnerships in which people can access that learning experience and build upon that lifelong learning, the better. And when we're looking at the education system, one of the key components that we're hearing right now is that there has been established partnership between the community and going into the education system. So looking into those partners and building those projects that support that growth allows the education of the high school students to learn about the possibility and what this whole aspect of volunteering is, as well as conservation, having an active role in their immediate area, but also it allows the community of the land trust to learn about the younger aspect and what is changing, and then make modifications into how their organization runs. So that, you know, one of the key things is people aren't available during the day. So how do you change that culture so that you can involve some of those younger groups, so that daytime is not a key component to being an active board member, but providing that aspect that everybody, whether you're a scientist or whether you're going to be, you know, a sports director or, you know, a journalist, you do need to know how your environment works, because you're going to have a role in it. Whether you vote, whether you pay for bills, whatever, you're going to have a role. And opening up more of those experiences is the key component and necessary in higher education. So I think that that key element that Laura's programs, as well as Amanda is illustrating, is to create those partnerships that allow for more access to actions.
That's, yeah, great comments. I want to, we haven't heard from Brian in a while, and I know he's been nodding his head once in a while here and there. So I just wanted to, you know, you can roll right off of what Sue said, or go back to something you had a thought on previously, Brian.
Well, and so I have a deep background in the next generation science standards. I've helped many organizations adapt programs and design new programs aligned to NGSS. And that science literacy component, very few people realize that the NGSS standards are written in a way that follows the arc of how science, as we understand it right now, has been developed, right? So it's somewhat following this historical how and when things were discovered. And it's the best question that I always love to ask kids is, how do you know that? They'll tell me that a tree gives off oxygen, but how do you know that? And so then you can begin to unpack, well, what research can you do? What experiments can you do to unpack that, right? And so that's building science literacy and environmental literacy from a place where they know that they can try out their own ideas. Instead of it just being, let me receive this information from all these learned scholars, right? They're building understanding within themselves, and they can articulate that and prove it to someone else. So that ability to communicate science to others is absolutely crucial, because these kids we're trying to coach them to be ambassadors, right? We want them to coach their younger students someday, you know, when they're affiliated with us, and or even not. So there is a little bit of a hesitation with NGSS, I found, with a lot of teachers and school groups, but it is designed to help us with this literacy component for sure.
No, that's you know, really well put. So we've mentioned this important thing of peers and near peer interactions, and then you know, Laura, what I liked about some of what Laura was saying was, you know, we tend to, when you think about the adults that are influential in a student's life, tends to be parents, teachers, coaches. What I like about what I'm hearing here is it turns out there's many other adults that could have an influence. So this idea about who could be my role model doesn't have to be your own mom or your own dad or that teacher. You can learn a lot about how these ideas could fit into both your future learning and your professional life. And I also, so there's something I'm really interested in. I'm going to come back to Sue to ask a little bit about working with teachers. But before I get there, I wanted to, because we've touched on it, some people call it trickle up and trickle out. And it, you know, it relates to the influence that young people can have on their peers, on their extended family, and on their communities. And community has come up as well. I'm wondering if, just open to the panel, do you have any experiences or even evidence about how young people can influence their communities through these experiences that they have? Maybe start with Laura. Do you have?
Yeah, so for one of our programs where it was a 2-day workshop where a teen and adult community partner came together to the workshop, and they were partnered up right away. They knew they were going to work on an environmental action project going forward. We were fortunate enough to partner with some colleagues here at UConn in the education department, and they were studying the learning that was happening, not just by that high school student, but also by the adult community partner. And it was really amazing to see how science, I guess, one's science identity, how you see yourself as contributing to scientific efforts, was formed in both the adults and the community partners. And to see sort of that exchange of knowledge and skills that happens both ways. So it's lifelong learning. So it's not just, I'm the adult community partner, I'm going to teach the student how to do this, and they're going to get a lot out of this. It really was a two-way street where the teens were, teaching in some cases, their adult community partners some cool new technology or apps on their phone, or how to do some interactive mapping using ArcGIS Online. And then the adult, in some cases, was bringing that rich community expertise and perspective on conservation projects. So I don't know if that's getting at what you were saying, but I think that's the tickling all over the place, what I saw at least.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's exactly the sort of thing I was thinking of, and I'm so your program sounds very intentional in that you're partnering. Some of the work we've done is to try and guide student learning, but build in part of the project components might be presenting something to the town council, for example. And I'm convinced that, no matter how hardened your position might be, that you're gonna be a little more open to when a young person is talking about their passion for something, you're going to be a little more open. You're going to listen a little better. So that's some of what I was interested in there. I wanted to mention also, we're all inspired by young people. In a way, we feed off of their energy, a certain amount of their openness. The Greta Thunberg is sort of a great example for this. And of course, she points out that they're not, she's not responsible for the current situation. And she's sort of holding those of us with resources and power, to account for this. So we had a question in the chat, and I just wanted to give Amanda the opportunity to talk about this for the general audience about the student board members and whether they were voting board members. So I think it kind of relates to this question of, how much real agency are we giving young people, and how sort of what the total experience is really like.
So we give each of our interns a half vote. So, so the thought process on that is their vote should count because they are actual board members. And I want them to be able to say that with confidence and write that on any resume with confidence, because their opinion does matter and it should count. But at the same time, they're new to this. So I don't necessarily want, 8, 16, 17-year-olds outvoting people who have more experience. And in that March through May, we do have up to 9 kids on our board because the seniors are going out and the sophomores are coming in. So they could outvote us. So that's why we stick to a half vote. It's a good compromise.
Okay. Do you get students who question that or push back?
No, I mean, we run our meetings by Robert's rules. So, there's always a discussion time. So the hope is that any discussion we would hash out any problems that we have. And I'd say most of the time we're all in agreement by the time we get to vote anyway. But at least they have the option to vote no if that's how they feel, or yes if that's how they feel.
Yeah. Well, I was going to turn to Sue and ask her, because Sue, you work with, my understanding is you work with teachers statewide. And I always think of it, sort of like I love working directly with students. I sort of think of that as like retail. But I actually put more resources and effort into working with teachers, sort of on on the more wholesale model. They become your sales reps in a way. They're the gateway to all these students that we're trying to influence. So maybe tell us a little bit about your experiences working with teachers, and maybe highlight what the key is, because we all know teachers are overworked and underpaid, under relentlessly changing standards and things like that. So how do we go about getting teachers to, sort of pay attention to these topics that we think are so important?
Well, it is a varied group, I have to say, and Connecticut is probably somewhat unique in some ways because we don't go by counties. So each school and each school district has their own flexibility of presenting the curriculum. So yes, there are the standards. So that's the general standard at which they'll be tested at, but the avenue that is chosen, and that's the great part of next generation science standards, is that it's not specific to, they have to teach about the water cycle in fourth grade, and then it goes into, strictly, goes into another area that's not possibly related. It does give them the flexibility to do a lot of redesigning of topics, but the curriculum stays the same, and that's tied to the standards. So what we try and do is we bring in the resources that help illustrate how are you going to meet those standards that are generally required across the school year. So it doesn't just become a field trip without body to it, that it just doesn't become Earth Week, and this is what we're doing in Earth Week, and then it has no connection to the next week of school that they go back to.
Right.
So we provide them with some of those resources through professional development, and also pointing them to people or groups that have resources that can help schools manage that. So when we do a development or a workshop, we try to bring in local organizations to work with and show what they can do in support of education. And that goes back to that partnering aspect of community government and education, is that the community has the support for what your school systems are looking for. And organizations, businesses, and town government offer those learning opportunities. So we're trying to connect those on the local basis. One thing that is very key is to try and show how that can be done throughout the school year. And it's different at different age levels. So what's key is to understand that for the K-12 system, science is not a required subject until middle school. In the elementary grades, science is not required like math and language arts is. So that's kind of a big hurdle, is that science is worked in on an interest for that teacher and that availability in that school system. So sometimes science is going to be once a week for 40 minutes. Sometimes it might be a couple times a week. And that's where, the informative years, the younger age groups are building the general information about science and knowing natural patterns. So when we're working with youth and offering them at middle and high school these opportunities, it's really great that they do learn those systems of how to work within that organization. And so the half vote, or giving them an actual, useful part where they can work on and do some applications, is probably the most beneficial because it gives a peek into the real world. And when we've worked with schools and have brought in topics, a lot of times we'll hear from teachers or from students themselves is that, I learned about water conservation, but I really want to do something. And I don't know, it just ended. So we talk about it. And this is kind of the hurdle that we are at now, is that for 40 years, we've been doing environmental education, informing and building awareness. And now our challenge is to give that awareness an outlet for action. And that's where we're working now, is to try and create more outlets that students can then become involved in. And that's the key component when we do our professional development, is try to inspire teachers of, well, get with these organizations and create these opportunities, as well as work within your own school, because the school could organize. We have a program in the state. It's called Greenleaf, which is a free program that any school district or school can join. And it looks at how to green the school system, as well as the facilities and the curriculum for sustainable living and development. And Weston High School was awarded the Green Ribbon recognition by the EPA, and our Greenleaf program is the nominating conduit to the federal Green Ribbon recognition. This was a couple years ago because a high school student took on the task of creating a green team for his school. And in that green team, they identified specific things they would like to adjust, such as their recycling, their food waste, their water use, and they came up with proposals and presented that to the school, and the school started to implement some of their changes. So that's the avenue a learning environment can give, as well as the land trust can provide, is allow those students to have their input, have it valued, and then help it be part of change. And the learning curve is to learn that sometimes you can't change it all, that it's going to take time and it's frustrating. That's really a thing that we sometimes burden youth with, is that it's eye-opening to learn how long it takes to do something.
Right.
And that's part of the process. So that's the challenge, and that's our scope of trying to work with schools, is to provide more of these opportunities.
Well, I'm glad you're taking that on, Sue. And I know lots of districts, even large districts, who have maybe trimmed back some of their support for science, but service learning, for example, is really strengthening in many places. So I'm wondering if any other, you sort of raised this general discussion point we had of how can we turn these experiences and this learning, first of all, we want young people to have a good experience. Then we want, maybe they actually learn something they remember and then turn that into action. So it looks like Amanda has something to say about that also.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on about what Sue was saying about applying it to the curriculum. So if any land trusts are having a hard time getting into the schools and getting their buy-in for programs, a lot of them, they don't want one more thing they have to do. So if you can sit down with the teachers and say, tell me about your science curriculum, what is your focus? And you find out what that grade is focused on. And then, you get a program that applies specifically to what that grade is working on. And then that way it is complementing what the teacher is already trying to work on. And it's not giving them more work on top of what they're already trying to do. And it can be as simple as, like, when we do kindergarten nature walk, we talk about primary colors, or we talk about vertical versus horizontal bark or something like that. So they're just little ways you can incorporate that into getting them out there and doing a nature walk, but we're still talking about things that they're learning in school, or adaptations with plants, that type of thing, or in 6th grade, the water cycles. But then we do like a water conservation relay, and you're running with water on your head, and they have to do a whole toilet bowl, not a real toilet bowl, but the amount that would fill up a toilet bowl of water. And how hard was that to run with? Just that's one time you flush the toilet and you had to run that a certain distance. So it's fun, but we're also talking about water cycles. So it covers what the teacher wants, but it's exciting for the kids. And so I think anything you can do to make it a win-win, it just gets your foot in the door. And then sometimes you are surprised and they let you do a little bit more or something, something more that we would like to accomplish. But you've got to meet them halfway and fill their needs as well.
I think maybe Brian had something to say, and then Laura.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Amanda is doing that's incredibly powerful is, as an organization, she's engaging her schools and her districts without making assumptions, right? You can't, especially in Connecticut with one of the highest achievement gaps in the nation, you can't assume that a district is or is not working on any particular thing. So asking them the question rather than assuming like, oh, this school's in East Hartford, they must not be doing anything science related, right? You can't make those assumptions. And that can also trickle down into your individual interactions. If you have a chaperone who's a parent on a trip, don't necessarily assume that they don't know anything about science. They might be a professor at UConn and you just don't know it yet. And that's a potential resource, right? Additionally, the way that I have always thought about programs for any non-traditional setting like a land trust or outdoor ed is on a spectrum from rigor to wonder, right? Mm-hmm. And in our hearts, we all know that wonder is a great way to get kids inspired. But then we also know that rigor is the way that they can justify the program to their administrators or write a grant. And so how do we strike that balance? And it's through really good questions. It's in building relationships with these school districts. It's going and meeting them. Perhaps it's not even coming to your land trust. Perhaps it's going to their school and investigating what they can do there, and then partnering that with a field trip to your facility. So really try to find whatever that school is looking for on that rigor to wonder spectrum, and you'll better fit their needs.
One more thing. Brian just reminded me of this key thing that I try to remember is, just as we say not all students are going to be scientists, not all teachers like nature. So I frequently hear in workshops is that I like learning and teaching about nature. I just don't want to be in it. And so that's what we can also help is bringing people to that happy medium of engaging in your environment, but not being, averse to some of those things. And so that's very important to understand where the teacher and where the administration is coming from as well. So thank you, Brian, for bringing that up.
Yeah, it's a good point, in general, to remember that not everyone may share our love of nature. It can be both relating to personal temperament and your comfort and your experiences, but also for some groups of people, we have a history, outdoor spaces have not always been safe and welcoming for everyone. So I think I very much strive for that in my thinking and programming, to find ways to bring in everyone. And again, this has really been emphasized well by the panel. Don't make these assumptions. We have to listen to what our audience is, meet them where they are. Laura, I wanted to give you a chance. Did you have any comments on, we've been talking about reaching teachers, and we've also been, we sort of broached the topic of how do we get from learning to impact?
Yeah, actually, I'm wondering if we could take it a little different
Sure.
route, which Brian got me thinking about a lot of the, don't make assumptions, don't come to a school or a community and say, hey, I've got programming for you. This is gonna be awesome. You need this. And I think that is really sage advice to go, if you're interested in engaging with a specific community or a specific school, to, even find opportunities to attend scheduled events that they already have and just go with no agenda, get to know that school system or that community, and, you know, just listen and soak it up and see then, oh, okay, we've got these resources. Maybe this is a good entry point to have that discussion of what could we do together to collaborate. And I think that's a really important, I guess the reason I bring this up is because it makes me think of, as we're thinking about the communities that we're serving with our programming, making intentional efforts to engage communities or populations of students that have been historically marginalized based on race, ethnicity, gender identity, socioeconomic status. And so I guess there's been a number of points here that I just wanted to share of things to keep in mind if when you are trying to develop programming to you know, address this issue of inclusivity and access, is to, one, what Brian was just saying, don't make assumptions, go listen, no agenda, and make sure you're genuine about your intentions. Another thing that we found so critical is, you know, finding that funding to make your programming free. And in some cases, even for us, you know, something that we've been striving to do is we have these environmental action projects. And this year, through some crowdfunding, we were able to get funds to provide our students with stipends as they work on those environmental action projects in case, you know, those students need to work a part-time job. This will help supplement that. Another thing that you know, we've been doing as with our instructors is learning more about culturally relevant instructional approaches and how do we I guess develop ways of inviting students to bring those assets or those lived experiences to the table and to their environmental action projects. And then I guess the final thing that I'll just share is I mentioned that I really liked Amanda's near peer model, as we can call it, you know, having students that are a little bit older than your I guess your audience, your participants, serve as those near peer role models. And that's something that we're piloting this year. We have undergrads that are going to take a leadership role in our programming and work, be an additional support to our students as they carry out their environmental action projects. And that's twofold. That's to provide, you know, that pathway programming for our high school students, but also to bring in other identities into our teaching staff. So our students bring different racial, ethnic, gender identities, as well as they come from different majors. So they bring those diverse perspectives as well. So that was just something that kept popping up in my brain as folks were sharing various tips to integrate into your programming.
Yes, well, thanks so much. I think that's really resonating with people. And there's some comments in the chat that, you know, this is an important topic. You know, when I was mentioning working with teachers, because, you know, the teacher workforce in this country, and I'm guessing Connecticut is pretty representative of this, you know, it is predominantly, the formal teacher workforce is predominantly female and predominantly white. But the student body is, it's, you know, that's the place to look to see where diversity is heading. And so those teachers both understand this diversity and they are also looking for ways to support that and serve that. So I think these are great points. I don't want to end this aspect of the conversation, and we can pick up talking about inclusion and diversity a little more. We did have a question from the chat, and I will say, so this is changing topic a little bit, but you know, my organization 30 by 30 has been in some ways a big opportunity, right? So this is on the, you know, it's inspired actually by the Half Earth goal. And this is an international goal, and you know, the Biden administration has highlighted getting to 30 by 30. This question, however, is focused on a bill that passed in the Connecticut legislature, which is to make climate change part of Connecticut's NGSS curriculum standards. And the questioner is interested in what kinds of opportunities this might create for reaching more kids, involving them with nature-based solutions to biodiversity and other problems. And it looks like Sue has something to say on this topic.
Yeah, that is great. And it did pass. So what that bill states is that the K-12 system shall teach climate change, whereas the previous bill said can. So instead of it being an option, it's now being a requirement. Now, with that comes a whole bunch of questions, one being, what will it look like? And so the Department of Education and the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection have been working on the partnering of how to make resources available. And since 2018, we've been providing, as stated in the bill, DEP is to provide resources, and you're looking at it. So it's a department of one that is working within our agency and all of the offices in the agency to collect the information that they have compiled and the resources they have available. And we have that on the DEP website. It also lists NOAA's resources and NASA's resources, as well as Connecticut educational resources for teachers and for individuals. So there's a variety of things available, and it's provided through workshops. The thing that we've been working on lately within the past 6 months is to come up with a template of what would a curriculum look like? What could a school system start with to integrate climate change's NGSS? And the key thing is that from the jump when NGSS was developed, which is Next Generation Science Standards, is that it specifically identifies climate change. So it's not rewriting any standards. It's doing exactly what they're currently required to do. And all we are trying to do is emphasize what are the activities, lessons, and opportunities that Connecticut provides that conveys that link for hands-on opportunities for the teacher to learn about climate and tell that to the students and allow the students to engage with what is happening, and they can then develop that into their understanding and action and their conscious for understanding and making decisions. So I don't know if that answers it, but resources are available, lots of workshops, public programs. Connecticut has been a forerunner for a long time in utilizing even the language climate change in our programs at nature centers, museums, and things. So it is now just being more overtly done, and with the requirement that in the school systems, they are to integrate it.
Yeah, no, it sounds good. I mean, I think, one of the challenges can be, these things can be essentially, unfunded mandate.
They still are. It doesn't give any money.
And unclear again, where does it fit in a crowded curriculum? But I think you folks, for example, can all be resources for this. Did anyone else on the panel have a comment? Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, there's people typically think of standards as like, you must teach this thing, and then this topic, and then this topic. NGSS is much more flushed out and kind of complicated to read in that department. But one of the best ways I've found over the years has been focusing on the science and engineering practices. And a lot of them feature biomimicry. And so if we're talking about finding new solutions to combat climate change, the engineers that are going to develop these systems are in school right now. And if we can put the idea in their head that nature has been engineering solutions to problems for millions of years, termites figured out how to do passive air conditioning, right? If we implement some of those solutions into our building projects, now we're using nature as inspiration to combat climate change. So it's one of the easiest ways to weave through the NGSS standards and not really have this like, okay, how do I teach climate change as a block, as its own thing? It really should be sprinkled throughout the entirety of the whole thing. You don't want to have all the toppings of the pizza all on one side. It gets a little bit doom and gloom. It gets a little bit laborious, and it gives that sense of like kids don't have the power to do anything to such a big problem. But if it's woven through, it's a bunch of small problems that a bunch of people can work together to solve.
Yeah, that's great. I also like to remind people, I was supportive. I actually contributed some work to developing the standards, and they're really based on emphasizing the skills and practices that actual scientists tend to use. So it's really about identifying interesting things to observe, making those observations, and then, finding ways to draw conclusions from them. So you're right, Brian, it can be intimidating to look at these standards, but when you boil them down, they're pretty good, mostly common sense types of standards that really follow scientific practice. Well, what I'd like to do now is I'm going to kind of frame a final question and then open it up to see if the audience wants to ask questions on nearly any topic. But as I mentioned earlier, so it looks like of the sort of protected natural spaces in Connecticut, about maybe half of them is land trust lands, and there's the membership is something on the order of, and I'm sure there's land trusts who are not a member of this organization, but there's like 130 of them. So I'm sure many of them are doing programs, doing versions. Do you think, should everyone be doing this? Do you have some lessons learned to share, or some ways to think about, maybe I'm a small trust somewhere, is it about, are there partnerships, coalitions, teachers, formal education versus other kinds of programs that could happen? So I'm kind of opening it up to advice you might give to trusts who are thinking about doing more with their education programs.
I can take a stab at some thoughts. I know one thing that we all know we are limited on is time, and what is our capacity. Many land trusts are volunteer based, and I think a key element to being able to support more young people in land trust work is to collaborate and work together and build those coalitions and pool funding to support students. And also mentoring takes time, and it's a skill that you're ever evolving. So partnering with other educators that like me or this amazing panel here to partner and collaborate on environmental action projects, I think is key. We're only stronger when we work together. So that's just one tip I would say.
Yeah, maybe Amanda. Yeah, do you have any suggestions, since you've sort of tell us about that.
So I mean, obviously you have to have somebody who's willing to go in and do the initial work, but I think so much of it can be spread out by whether you're working with other land trusts. So sometimes when we do programs, like we had an agreement with, I think it was 4 land trusts, and we each were going to do 1 program a month. Well, now we suddenly had 4 programs instead of each of us only having 1 program. So I think working together is really helpful. As far as the internship program, yes, I go in and I talk to the school and I meet with the kids. But then our stewardship chair is the one who brings them on their tour, and they pick a property to steward. Well, then whoever's stewarding that property is now their co-steward. So now they're working with the co-steward a little bit. So it's not all on me, and I'm not making sure that, they do everything. Everybody does a little piece, and then it's not so overwhelming, and you're still getting, they're getting connections and networking with many adults, which I think is more beneficial than just working with one person anyway.
Brian or Sue, any?
Yeah, I can go ahead. I think it's really important that we think about sustainability of these programs, right? If you're trying to build a relationship with a school district, you need to think about who's going to be the owner of those relationships throughout that whole time. And I think personally, I feel like it's not fair to ask that of a part-time person or a per diem person or a volunteer. This is a big initiative. It's often mission focused, and I think it warrants some really long-term planning, right? Land trusts are trying to preserve land in perpetuity, right? So can we also think about our education programs as being sustainable in perpetuity? So really putting in a lot of work about how can you make this longitudinal? How can you interact with the same school district year after year? And oftentimes that's investing in a person. And however you can try to find that funding model, it's really important. There's a program that I've been involved with CFPA with the Wyndham Middle School. And those kids have a tangible difference in their experience because they've been to the same place and worked with the same educator for like 6 years in a row. And it's a lot better odds of getting that sustainable impact that we're looking for. We're not doing the flash in the pan. It's not that Bill Nye in the forest, right? We want these kids to have some lasting changes in their mindset and their behaviors. And so that takes investment. But also, it's really important to communicate what you're doing. If people don't know your successes and don't know what you're trying, or even within like a group like this, understanding your failures, right? If I cannot make the same mistakes as someone else, awesome. I'm learning from someone else's experiences, and it's really powerful to go in a better direction more quickly. So yeah, that's my advice.
That's great.
And just to finish up is, like it's been said, is that if you're starting or you're looking into what kind of educational support or outreach, you don't have to always go to the schools first. So again, you're going to have to look at what is your purpose for education, and are you looking for providing a service, or are you looking to build? Because when we're talking about building youth and getting youth involved in our groups, you might be seeing youth as a different age group than high school. So you might be looking at a younger group in your own area, and you're looking for those families so that you have more of a membership to your base. So you got to look at what is your purpose for engaging with education, and then work to provide that purpose first. And in allowing, if you're just dipping a toe in and trying to figure out what to do, go small and start with your own community. Make yourself and your properties available. So we do work to preserve and protect these, but we also want people to understand why it's there. And so making yourself available for presentations at the library, for tours on your site, participating in maybe a local nature center's Earth Day or Winter Festival or something like that, rather than creating your own. That's frequently everything's always on the same weekend. So you're going to split an audience. So before you go in, decide if you're splitting or if you really want to build in certain areas. So I think the evaluation starts with why and what education are you doing, and then start small and build larger. And then you'll have a higher success. But do value the outreach and the support in communities.
That's great. Some sage advice all around. Well, we've had a great, wide-ranging conversation. I think you folks have just shared your experiences so well. We have a few minutes, so I'm gonna just call out to the audience to now would be the time to put any questions you have in the chat. And while we're looking for some of these questions to populate the chat, I'm going to ask the panelists to think about, is there any key point you think we missed, or is there kind of a little take home message that you want to craft in your head? Now would be a good time. Let's see. I think mostly, let's see, I'm trying to see if we're getting any a direct question that I can share with the
I
panel.
think this is Amy, everybody, and I do see Jolene's it's more of a comment, and I did see Amanda raising her hand, Amanda being from an all-volunteer land trust in particular. But I think it's worth noting Jolene's comment, because we hear it a lot. In a perfect world, all land trusts would have relationships with educators in their school system, have student interns, have the people and resources, etc. Small all-volunteer land trusts don't live in a perfect world. Programs need leaders, and most volunteers are already doing all they can. All ideas presented here are wonderful, thank you. But small land trusts need help, people, resources, pamphlets, etc. So I think, Sue, you touched on that about going small, but any final words, particularly for our small all-volunteer land trusts, maybe reiterating some of the points that you made to address that concern?
Well, the only thing I would say is what I heard. I heard start small, focus. That's always sounds like good advice. But also, I'm really intrigued by this notion of forming coalitions and partnerships. So whether you're small or even bigger, you get more. You just get more. You can offer multiple programs. Is there any other ideas?
I would say a lot of it, we're an all volunteer land trust as well. And a lot of it is putting structure into it. So starting small, like when we did the internship program, of course, we only started with, we had 3 to start. And we wanted to see how it would go, but we have a calendar that we work off of an annual calendar and what we need to do every year. So now in our calendar, every January, it lists that we need to talk to the school about interns. So it's like that. Oh, so nobody forgets because it's on the annual calendar. So if we forget, we make sure that then it's time to contact the schools. Or we have it written into our into our bylaws about our internship program that we have interns. So it's a part of our structure. And sometimes I fight that a little bit because, they want to write in, you're going to have 2 per year. And I'm like, well, what if I only have 1 I want, or that type of a thing. But if you put it into your structure, you're just more likely to make it happen. And then, like I said, it takes a team. So making sure you have the buy-in of your board. And again, I go in and I talk to the schools and make that initial contact, but then, the stewardship chairs during the tour, and the co-steward is the one helping them write a report once a year. And, again, it's spreading it out a little bit, and then the structure to make sure you get it done for consistency's sake. Is that helpful?
I think that's very helpful. Amy, do you have any other questions from the chat that you wanted to?
Yeah, it looks like one last question and then a final comment here. And it's, do any of you prepare kids or interns to deal with adults who are not interested in giving young people a voice, or who deny the importance of environmental issues? Interesting.
Yes. Yeah, that is a key component that we deal with when we're doing presentations to older students, or working with students who are going to go out and do projects or such, is that, how to engage with the public. And sometimes you do come across people, but who are of a different mindset. And the thing is that we all share core values, and one of them is that everyone is important and is part of our living system. And so you give them some skills to address issues. We tend to try and not put youth in those situations, because that is a little higher skill level. But that in our situation, when we're dealing with college students who are coming into state parks, that's a key element in how to communicate and how to basically make sure you can find someone who can answer that question or help divert some of that from the student, but you don't want to set it off into a negative area from the beginning. But do let them know it does happen.
Anything else, Amy?
I'm seeing a lot of great comments, but I don't see any more questions. And CLC staff, please jump in if I'm missing any that came earlier that I passed over. One thing I will say, and I want to emphasize on our part from CLCC's perspective, of course, is the collaborative nature of so much of what has been expressed today, including exactly that reaching out with neighboring land trusts, with also the organizations that are obviously here today, and other resources are a great way to start. And so if you're an all volunteer land trust and you don't have the resources to take all of this on, it's maybe partnering with a neighboring land trust to put your heads together and think, how can we do this together? And then going to some of the individuals here to get some ideas on taking those steps forward. So anything else here? We've got 3 minutes left. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up a little early. And yes, Amanda, please. Thank you.
I just noticed some people were talking about the Eagle Scout projects. And I'm an assistant scoutmaster for a troop, and that's a huge asset to small land trusts. Go talk to your Girl Scout groups and your Boy Scout groups. Many of them have conservation requirements. Boy Scouts in particular, they have to do 3 conservation hours during when they're a Star Scout. And then they also have to do either a conservation merit badge or environmental science, where they do observations. And so those are great opportunities for them to come work with the land trust. And then following up with them is just the most important thing. So we had some Boy Scouts that came and worked for us, and they had cut down Japanese knotweed. And I actually just sent them pictures today of some native plants that have been able to grow since they cut it down. And so it's a great way for them to feel good to know a year later, look at, we already have native plants growing there because of what you did. So the more you can take those personal moments and follow back up with them, I think it's just so beneficial.
So great. See benefits right away. And yeah, Laura, you had a comment.
Yeah, that made me think of another idea, and Janet just said it in the chat. There's so many vocational agriculture schools that their students have to create or have to complete SAE hours, and many teachers are looking for opportunities to get their students involved in, community-based efforts. So reaching out to those teachers, making that connection, throwing out a couple of project ideas might be a great way of, engaging students in those projects.
I would agree with that. And the thing is a lot of people think, there's the agri-science program in Suffield or it's in Bloomfield. Well, there are students from all those surrounding towns that go to that school. So if you go talk to that school, there could be someone in your town and they want to do their project within their town, and they have to do 40 hours by their senior year. So those are great ways to access young people.
Sorry, another one. Also thinking about those magnet schools that are focused on specific careers. So, and they will they have a fee-based system where you can pay for some of their services to help with construction projects or maybe even culinary efforts if you have an event. So, there's other ways of engaging youth, not strictly in environmental efforts.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we're gonna wrap it up here. I want to thank all of you so much for your participation of both the audience and the panelists. I hope this has been illuminating for everybody. And I'm just gonna say thanks and turn it over to Amy to sign us out.
Thank you all so much. Dennis, what a tremendous job of facilitating. Thank you for that. And to all of you for giving your time and sharing your expertise and insights with us today. I know I learned quite a bit, and hopefully what Land Trust can do is go back and talk to their board members and other volunteers and start thinking about, if they're not doing something, how they can get started, and to reach out to Land Trust in the region as well as all of you for some ideas. But if you are doing things right now, how you can ramp it up a little bit by doing just the same, collaborating with your neighbors and reaching out and using the individuals here and others that we will provide for you with a list of resources after the fact as for advice and help. So with that, I'm going to thank you all. We are out of time, and I want to wish you all a wonderful day. Enjoy it. It's beautiful. I've been standing out here the whole time and really taking this all in. And we have one more workshop. It's tomorrow night at 6:30, and it's going to be a really interesting conversation around taking action to address the climate crisis through very different lenses. So I hope that you will join us for one last workshop or conversation for the 2022 conference. Thanks again, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Dennis, for leading everything.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.